We give thanks that faith as a victory has brought you here today through the mass of people that were here to greet you. We've had several services and we've tried to push it out of the way. Anyway, this happens about, I'm told, about every 6 weeks, isn't it? Yeah. Something like the challenge of fitness or something like that they have here. So anyway, we give thanks that in between we all have a wonderful, plenteous parking. I want to thank Chris for being with us today as our platform assistant. Next week, Cherie will be back. She's speaking in, where is she speaking? She's speaking somewhere south of us, I know. Stockton. Good for you. She's speaking in Stockton. I love this. You know, there's only one mind. It is true. If you found that, when you start thinking about something that can't quite bring it, somebody standing right here, you will just pop it up like that. Just one mind. We continue to be open to Spirit's guidance in terms of a perfect meeting place. We have been thinking, as I think I shared with you, in that this makes a very comfortable place for us most of the time. And I say comfortable because we've done a little research on where everybody's mailing address is, postal zone, zip numbers, and half of you are that way and half of you are up that way. So this is really sort of a perfect area for us. So we thought that in the interim we might consider taking an office that has room for classes. And last week we found one that I thought, this is it. It had a little fireplace in it. It had a little kitchenette, private bathroom, 2 office spaces besides. Perfect. Except, the leasing agent said, well, you can't find a parking place right now, but in the afternoon it just clears. And I thought, well, we could just have afternoon classes or evening. So I checked in the afternoon. It wasn't any better. So anyway, parking is important, as you know. So anyway, our perfectly right place will open for us, and we give thanks for that. I want to remind you again that those little red buckets at the end of the row have prayer slips in them for you to fill out and put in our prayer box here so that we can all hold those prayer requests in consciousness through our week of prayer. And as I've shared with you, we send those on to Silent Unity at the end of every month. I mention that particularly because I have noticed that, because I take the prayer slips myself and send them to Silent Unity at the end of the month, and I notice that the prayers come in on all different types of slips. That means people grab things that they've got in their handbag or whatever. So if you want to use those slips, well, they're there for you to use. Also, you can sign up to be on our weekly message list if you'd like to receive a word that I share every week about something that's, I think, pertinent to our spiritual pathway. I don't know how exactly to say this, except these days I have so much time to do the kind of research that I haven't had in a long time. And every area I read in where there are cutting-edge writers, you know, it all comes back to the same thing, that we are mind beings in the process of growing into a total wonderful expression that it exceeds anything we've ever known before. But we have to constantly be reminded of it. So anyway, that's what those weekly messages are for you. They're in between Sundays. Let's see if I have anything else for us here today. I want to remind you that you can see, thanks to Maggie McGurk and her good husband, a rerun of the weekly message on Capital City Unity. Just go to Capital City Unity and you'll see the YouTube presentations of our lessons. I know I asked you last week what the title of my talk was, and you flunked out completely, so I know you came this week prepared. I won't even ask you if you all know, but I'm going to tell you it's the Big Boss. The title today is The Big Boss. We're going to talk about Abraham. The story of Abraham, which is rather a lengthy story in the Old Testament. But I believe that this story and the Garden of Eden have had more impact upon the history of the world and the unfoldment of humanity than any other two stories. We've talked about the Garden of Eden story and how it impacted the world because it convinced many people, particularly those of Christian faith, that they were all sinners, that we were born into Adam's sin, and that our Christian role was to earn our way back into God's good graces. But with Abraham, the story of Abraham, it's different because Abraham represents, in the story, the father of all nations, and was an affirmation in particular that his people were God's chosen people. And that set into consciousness in the world something that I think has brought about tremendous damage. And I have no doubt that one of the reasons that Hitler took his stance about the Aryan race was because he knew the power that the Jewish element of Germany, they were in such great control of the money of Germany, but he took it upon himself to single them out for persecution because his response to that. And it has been a challenge for the Jewish people, the ancestors of Abraham, for generations. It does happen also, as you know, that Abraham is considered to be the father of the Arab nations. And how that split took place has also been a sort of festering point that has gone on for generations of time. And when you and I come together to talk about this, to me, and I hope I'm able to convey it to you, to me it's incredible that the human race, no, I take that back. We're just growing children, that's all. And so, as that, we chose to take these stories literally. And when you take them literally, they feed our consciousness with the kind of thoughts that I've shared. Even though the stories literally make little sense. In the story of Abraham, there's repetition, and it tells one story one way, and then it tells the story another way. And as some writer has said, if you look at the numbers of the ages of the people involved, it looks like Ishmael, who was Abraham's first child, when his wife Hagar took him, it says she took him and threw him under a bush while she prayed. There's one writer who rebels at the thought of taking this literally, said, if you figure up the years of the father, you find out that Ishmael must have been 16 years old. He said that was quite a throw that she made when she threw him under the bush. Anyway, it's filled with things like that. So, why are the stories there? And of course, our approach is they're there because they contain insights that somehow, and I've suggested there was universal mind working through the writers of the time were inspired to write these stories that made sense in their own time, but they also conveyed a deeper message of consciousness. I mean, actually that's true in much of the things that we do and relate to each other. Sometimes the things that we say literally aren't as important as what they convey underneath that we're saying. So we're going to look at the story of Abraham. It was first Abram was his name, and then it was changed to Abraham. And if you look at, and the key, we believe, to understanding each of these allegories is to understand the meaning of the names of the main characters. So the meaning of Abraham is father of heights or exaltation, faith in God. He represents faith in God. And I suggest that in the beginning of the story, he represents the faith of God in a very immature way. a way that is still prevalent in the human race, and that is, I'm just in this world, but every once in a while I need some help, and so I'm able to make contact with God. But as far as my daily life is concerned, I'm just here in the world doing my thing. But thankfully, as a good Christian, as a good Jew, as a good Muslim, I can turn to God. That's sort of where Abraham is by his name. But right away we're told and given a clue to the fact that this is not the height of consciousness for humans, because we're told that he marries Sarai, S-A-R-A-I, Sarai. And Sarai means bitter, contentious, dominative, quarrelsome. Which tells us that's a part of a consciousness that's just doing it on its own thing. And to complicate the thing, our friend Abraham took as his care, his ward, his brother's son, Lot. And I think most of us have heard of Lot, but not everybody knows what Lot's name means. It means covering, veiling, muffling, hidden, covert, black art, magic, sad. You have to realize the Hebrews were very interested in the way they gave so many meanings to a name, but all those meanings are involved and can be conveyed by that word Lot. So, do you know anybody that has a contentious, quarrelsome kind of consciousness? Who looks to things like magic to work out their problems? Who also find themselves doing covert things to accomplish their ends? Well, you do if you think that's the only way you're going to be able to deal with life. And so what I'm suggesting is that's what Abraham means at that level of evolution. That is the consciousness that we have. Early on in the story, we're told that Abraham decides to go to Egypt because, like in the story of Joseph and Jacob, there was a famine. So they had to go to Egypt for the food. Interesting, isn't it, that that pops up in the story too, like it does in the other story. And so they go to Egypt. But now, our friend Abraham, who's figuring things out as he goes along, he realizes, my wife, Sarai, is a beautiful woman. And I know that as soon as we go into Egypt, the Pharaoh is going to hear about her, and he's going to want her. And if he wants her, that means I'm going to be done in. So I'm going to figure this thing out. And when we get to the border, I'll tell them she's my sister. And so that's what happens. And indeed, the Pharaoh hears about Sarai and says, bring her to me. And so Sarai becomes one of his wives. He is very grateful to Abraham and to Lot because they brought their relative there to Egypt. And so he honors them. And so our friend Abraham and Lot become very rich and have many cattle and all the things that go with being rich in those days. But then something happens. You remember what happened to the Pharaoh?
No.
With Joseph?
No.
And they had the plagues. Isn't it strange that pops up again in this story in Egypt? The Pharaoh's family began to have plagues of all different kinds. And so somehow the Pharaoh is enlightened to the fact that he had been done in by Abraham, because he suddenly discovers, doesn't tell you how, but he discovers that Sarai is Abraham's wife, not his sister. And so he says to him, you have done a terrible thing to me. Get out of Egypt. Do you think that's the way most pharaohs would have handled that situation? But anyway, in this story, Abraham is set free from this experience. And so he leaves. our friend Abraham does something very important at this stage. He splits with Lot. He splits with Lot. As soon as they have left Egypt, he decides to tell Lot to go his own way. And it says at that point, the Lord said to Abraham, after Lot had separated from him, "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are northward and southward and eastward and westward. For the land which you see I will give to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your descendants also can be counted. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." Pretty great. So what's happened if we're talking about consciousness? He got rid of Lot. Lot was the conniver, right? He's the consciousness that got them into Egypt. And they made money and they prospered. But at this point in time, our friend Abraham is beginning to be enlightened. And so he tells Lot to go his own way. He begins to change his consciousness. When Abraham expresses his desire to have his child, to have a child, his wife Sarah finally says to him, "Take my handmaid, Hagar, and she will bear you a child." And so that's what our friend Abraham does. And his child, oh, and by the way, Hagar means fugitive, wanderer, stranger, take flight, flees one's country. Strange is, her name means all that because that's what she ends up doing, as most of you probably know. He has a son, and the son's name is Ishmael. Ishmael means whom God hears, understanding of God, and who is obedient to God. I suggest that Ishmael represents the consciousness that still puts faith in God as a hope of change without recognizing the power of individual faith. It is a recommitment to the fact that God will move in our lives and bless us. At the age of 99, God comes to Abraham again. And this is what God had to say to him this time. When Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abraham and said to him, "I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless, and I will make my covenant between me and you and will multiply you exceedingly." Then Abraham fell on his face, and God said to him, "Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be Abraham, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come forth from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you. And I will give to you and to your descendants after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God." Well, this is a critical point in our understanding of this history, because not only is the king of all nations, but in particular the land of Canaan, which is where the Jewish people call their homeland now and are struggling with their neighbors. When it says in here that you will be the king of nations and all people, I suggest the key to understanding this whole thing is to know the author is not really talking about nations and people. The author is talking about thoughts. The author is talking about thoughts. As our friend Abraham is going through the process of learning and growing, He's moving from a place of thinking his only possible benefit for good is from God. And so he goes to church, he goes to the synagogue daily and faithfully, because God will honor him or her and bless them. But gradually, now what we see is a shift, that eventually that same consciousness is going to go from that kind of attitude about their life to realizing it is their thoughts that God is giving us dominion of, not land. Not that which has caused all these problems through generations of time. It is our thoughts. Faith in God, and faith in God working through our personal mind faculty of faith. It isn't that we desert our faith in God, it's just knowing that God has created us to work through our consciousness, the people that we hold in consciousness. Everything on the face of this earth is a product of the faith faculty of humankind. When you think about that. Everything on the face of the earth, all the what is a product of the faith faculty of humankind. God gave his covenant that he would make Abraham, as he's now called, and Abraham means faith as the father of all nations. And after God has given his covenant that I will make you in charge of all nations, of all your thoughts, he asks for another covenant, or rather he expresses another covenant. And that is that he says, you must of this day circumcise all the males in the land. You all familiar with that? Probably so. We think, well, interesting little thing that God would say. Why would he pick on the man?
Because they deserve it.
I heard that. Someone said over here that because they deserve it. But when you realize, again, we're talking about consciousness, and you realize that the male represents the thinking nature of humanity, you suddenly go, oh, what he's really saying, what we generally think this represents, and that is a kind of cleansing and purifying process. And so I'm suggesting to us that with this bit of scripture, God is saying, okay, you can be ruler of all things, but you got to do one thing to do it, because it won't happen in any other way. You can't be my people unless all the males have had this experience. Unless there is a purifying of your consciousness. A purifying of your consciousness. You know, immediately after Abraham was named Abraham, God also renamed his wife from Sarai to Sarah. And Sarah means princess, noble woman. Okay, we've talked about what man represents. Generally, man represents the thinking nature. The woman, generally, represents the feeling nature. So now Sarai becomes Sarah, and so what happens as Abraham begins to get into this fact that it's my thinking that needs to be purified, what happens when your thinking gets purified? Your feeling nature begins to feel like a queen or a princess. You know? Your thinking, your thinking nature maybe thinking, oh my, this is the crummy day. So you're thinking it's a crummy day. What's so bad about that? It's a crummy day. But not when you're Abraham and realize that God has given you a covenant that your every thought, but particularly your use of God's name in any way or inference is all powerful. When you realize that, then you realize that we have to, as I said, cleanse it and purify it to think the good only. And so you say, it's a crummy day, so what's the big deal? But on the other hand, if suddenly some guy comes along and says, happy am I, I'm rich, I'm happy, happy am I, I'm rich today. Happy am I, I'm rich, I'm happy, happy am I, I'm rich today. You can't get in the spirit of that until your feeling nature begins to feel like a queen. It feels so much better in thinking, it's a crummy day. Immediately your feeling nature, your moods, which is from your feeling nature, begin to go sour. They don't shine like a princess. But when you recognize that God said, you'll keep a covenant with me, you will think the good only. When you think the good only, then you've got Sarah by your side. Your feeling nature is going to be feeling like a queen. Beautiful. When God told Abraham that his name would be Abraham and changed Sarah's name to Sarah, he said, she is going to bear you a child also. And Abraham, when he heard this, said, he didn't say anything, he started to laugh. He said, how can a man 100 and a woman 90 have a child? Now, why would he do that? Because he's in process. He's in process. He isn't finished. Do you know anybody else that's in process? I mean, it's a magnificent thing to understand. I'm in process. So I'm very capable of giving this lesson and tomorrow saying, it's a crunchy day. I don't usually say that, but something similar, you know. Whereas the covenant, God said, if you really want what I have to give you, you must purify your thought to think the good only. But so, Abraham's not finished. He isn't there yet. And so when God says to him, Sarah's going to have a child now. Abraham, the intellect goes, at 180, and I'm 100 and my wife is 90, we're going to have a child. So he starts to laugh. Well, that's what the intellect often does. Maybe not a rolling laughter, but you think, God can get rid of this for me. I can birth this good that I want to have in my life. And then we go, I'm just me, I am. That happens to the people I read about. That's what the intellect does. And so, what does Abraham do besides laugh? He says, oh, that Ishmael might live in thy sight. That Ishmael might live in your sight. Now that's his first son that he had. And out of the blue he says to God, oh, that Ishmael might live in thy sight. What could that mean? I suggest that it means simply, I really prefer to let God do it all. I mean, it really was much easier when I thought, God will do this for me, than to say, I have the capacity to make it happen. I I have the capacity to see it happening for myself or for my loved one. And so God says to our friend Abraham, no. And then he says, your son's name will be Isaac, which means he, God, laughs. Laughter, joy, singing, leaping. Once you really know and begin to live by the process of catching yourself in your thought processes and begin to turn them all to, I think the good only, it makes life so enjoyable. You just want to laugh. You wake up smiling and happy. It can't be any other way. If you really have come to a place where you know God has given me this gift. And there must be something like a dictator in me. I feel like going, I'm sorry, well, I'll be right back.
You know, and just taking each one of us, I could be sitting there, I start with me with that, and say, "Gee, you know that? Why do you think anything but that?" And then to you, and to you. Because I know we're all in this together, and I'm going through my day, and I'm doing so well, and
I find myself laughing at these emails I get from my fellow senior citizens about senior citizens who get into the room and say, now what am I here for? Why do I laugh at that? It's not funny. It's not funny for probably the reason you're laughing at it, because you think, I relate to that. But because I should laugh, which means I give lip service to that. I do that. I get into a room and can't remember what the heck I came there for. But wait a minute. So that's okay, isn't it? I mean, that happens to senior citizens. But why should I give my power to exalting it? Why? Not if I value who I truly am. That's the key. When God gave Abraham Ishmael, and Ishmael was by Hagar, and when Abraham said to God, but what about Ishmael? And God said, no. But then he comes back, and God comes back to him later and says, I have heard you. Ishmael will be made father of a great nation, father of 12 princes. There's that number 12 again. And down Abraham's line through Isaac, we come to Jacob, and Jacob had 12 sons. Happenstance? No, it's all symbology again. But the reason God said, okay, I'm giving you Ishmael too, I suggest it fits the pattern that we're talking about consciousness. And what God is saying, when he first said, no, we're not going by the way of Ishmael, you're going by the way of Isaac, which means you got to learn to do the work. And then God said, but that's okay. Ishmael also will be a father of many nations, many thoughts, meaning I will still be there. God will be there in the process of your growing to take charge of your consciousness, to purify your consciousness, to expressing the good only. The relationship that we have to God and to our using our faith faculty is probably the most important thing that we could consider. And that it was captured in this story is an incredible thing. We only have one more Bible lesson after this one next week, but I I just love what we've shared together because it's reinforced it for me. We had earlier on talked about the Garden of Eden, and I said, it's about the process of evolution. Remember, I said it was when, in evolution, humanity became self-reflective. That was the beginning of a potential for evolution's growth. That it would suddenly be able to think for itself and to reason, reflect on things. So that was the beginning. That's what the Garden of Eden story was about. Not about sin at all. Exciting when you know that. And then we talked about the story of Noah. And I said that the story of Noah was not about a literal flood, but rather it was a point in time, in evolution, where it didn't have to be erased and start over again. Because I told you at that time that 99% of all the species of evolution up to humankind had been eliminated, self-eliminated, because they didn't fit the mold of life. But the Noah story is telling us, as we have become reflective, now we have a race of people that God can say, there'll be no more floods. Nobody's going to get wiped out. You're not going to get wiped out no matter what the most negative amongst us have to say. We're not going to get wiped out because we are, at this point in time, the kickoff point for what God is trying to accomplish through reflectivity. And when we come to the story that we just shared today, we're looking again at the evolving process of consciousness that has gone from simple consciousness, looking only to God for its good, to realizing I have the seeds of goodness within me. And it all comes through what is not in this story, but was in the story of Moses, of course. And that is when God shared his name and said, my name is I am that I am. I am that I am. And we are in the process of being able to close our eyes and know I am. As I stand here today, I am that I have said I am. In my mostly self-talk. It's the self-talk that gets us in trouble. No, it's the self-talk that we need to work at. It's, what are you saying to yourself? What are you saying I am? The one we've already referred to. If you're saying I'm old, you don't have to be 70, 80, or 90 to think that. I get humorous remarks by people who say, I've turned 60. I am 60. That would mean nothing to say that, except you are the channel for creative energy. That's the story of evolution. We have evolved to a point where centers of consciousness, we are creating the world. First our own lives, and collectively the world. So on this Sunday, in the spirit of Abraham and his wives and all his nations of children of thought, I give thanks that we can reconsecrate ourselves, because each one of us has a gift to the world. It starts by giving it to your own family and to those around you, by being a center of, I am the good only, and you are the good only. Doesn't mean we close our eyes to things that have to be worked with, but we approach them in the consciousness of a potential rather than a lack. Philip, let us finish. Close your eyes for a moment. And as we conclude this, I just want to affirm the wonder of your being, the wonder of my being. We look with wonder at that which is before us. Miracle follows miracle, and wonders never cease. Because I dare to believe in the goodness of myself, in the world in which I live. Thank you, God, for the covenant that we receive, the assurance that your energy works through us to create wondrous things of good.